As South Africa is reeling from the wave of gender-based violence, the South African Council of Churches has called for a concerted mindset change campaign against gender-based violence. There's been a spike in cases of gender-based violence during the lockdown, including the murder of young women by their partners. For more on the subject, we're joined via Skype from Johannesburg by the South African Council of Churches General Secretary, Bishop Malusi Mpumlwana. Bishop, a very good morning to you. Not a great conversation to be starting with this morning. The killing of Tsegofatso Pule this week, just reminding us about the depth of gender-based violence in South Africa yet again.
Terrible. It's terrible, you know, and we're saying every time we get the headlines of one woman who's been killed, we know she represents 1,000 others whose names we don't know. And so it's a massacre of women in their homes, in the street, in the valleys, in the darkness of our townships. And all this is, we believe, has to do with two things. One, we are a wounded and traumatized society. And the tendency with people with a society of trauma is to prey on those who are weaker in that environment. In this case, there is a tendency, because of the economic weakness of women in the home environment, historically, they become the object of attack. But there is something bigger than that. It is the patriarchy that we have developed as a culture. It is in our religion, it is in our culture, it is in our education, it is in our socialization and upbringing, it is in our cultural initiation rites, it is in everything we do. Even the grade school readers are patriarchal. And this needs a huge campaign of mindset change to reset the button in our society. Now, look at this. In 2 months, we have learned how differently to live. No handshakes, social distance, masks. You can't even recognize people. And we are washing our hands. All these things we have learned in 2 months. We can do the same kind of campaign for everything that has to do with patriarchy. So what we're saying in the South African Council of Churches is that all of us need to look at our scripts. How are we doing business in relation to women in our society? And even the idea of lesbian women being killed in or so-called corrective rapes has to do with the idea that I decide what you must be like, and I will force you to be what I want you to be, because it is this tendency amongst men, us, that we control, we can decide what a woman should be like, should dress like, should walk like.
I'm going to read you a part of the statement that was released by the presidency. President Cyril Ramaphosa saying, as we struggle to come to terms with the brutality inflicted on Tsegofatso Pule, Naledi Pangindawo, Nompumelelo Chaka, and other women in the Eastern Cape and KwaZulu-Natal whose bodies were found dumped this week, another woman has lost her life. I imagine this is in reference to the woman who was found in Dobsonville, reports coming in last night. The manner in which these defenseless women were killed points to an unconscionable level of barbarism and lack of humanity, says the president. Bishop, what are your thoughts about the inadequacy of what government is doing to help fight the scourge?
I think that it is a collective responsibility. Government really is a manager that's employed by society through election to manage the affairs. But even if you have a manager, that doesn't take away your responsibility to do what you need to do. I think that government should do more in terms of, it's in the justice level to make sure that maybe have special costs for gender-based violence that are focused so that these things can be speedily dealt with, to bring the confidence amongst women that cases will actually be taken through. and have a training, special training for police, in the same way that there are special units that are trained, for example, to deal with poaching, special units to deal with crime of so-called serious commercial crimes. There has to be a unit that's focused on gender-based violence, and that's one thing. But there also is something that government can do to create an environment that advances women. For example, certain quotas of their departmental focus. And I think that they are trying to do that. That women should be empowered in a way that makes them less dependent on the men. But there's more to be done. I'm talking about a culture change. That is not a governmental thing. It is a governmental thing to the extent that they can deal with education, they can use the public broadcaster, they can do those things. But we have to make sure that we twist and change the attitude of our society. And we do that through socialization. It is a socialization. How do you form the attitude of a person? That is something that we need to deal with as a society. All of us that have got socialization instruments, we can do those in partnership with government.
You touched a bit on the scourge of corrective rape. It's another big conversation for another day. But the big story this week has been hashtag Black Lives Matter. And the question keeps coming up from the LGBTQI community and from women to say, if you say Black Lives Matter, but you don't respect the rights of lesbians to be different, the rights of women to be in charge of their lives, then it's not really it's a disingenuous message.
Hello, I've lost your voice.
Bishop, I was picking up on what you were saying earlier about corrective rape and saying that the big story this week has been hashtag Black Lives Matter. And one question that keeps coming up is, what do you mean that Black Lives Matter when you can't respect some people within that group, those people being either women or people in the LGBTQI community?
I will go to one of my predecessors, Archbishop Desmond Tutu. He once said in the apartheid days, freedom is indivisible. Indeed, justice is indivisible. So you cannot have justice for one and not justice for the other. Freedom for one and not freedom for others. So when we say social justice is the right of every South African, or in fact every city, doesn't matter if you're not a South African. If you live in this country, you have all the rights that are constituted to you. So there is no question about it. The Black Lives Matter issue really, as you know, is an identification with the American challenge of a particular campaign in that country. But in this country, yes, Black Lives Matter, but I would say all lives matter in South Africa. It is about justice for all.
Bishop, thank you so much for talking to us this morning. Just before we let you go, I want to just digress a bit. The Council of Churches pre-1994 was one of the big proponents, and you're part of the lobby process for the electoral process and the Electoral Act to be promulgated. What conversation has been taking place within your institution in terms of the decision that was taken by the High Court this week, where it was declared that the Electoral Act 73 of 1998 is unconstitutional to the extent that it requires that adult citizens may be elected to the National Assembly and provincial legislatures only through their membership of a political party, overturning that aspect of the South African electoral process. What conversations have been taking place within the Council of Churches in this?
Well, we began this conversation over 2 years ago as the South African Council of Churches through our South Africa Will Pay For campaign, which has got we set up the national convention process. We brought a number of practitioners, activists, academics to talk about what does it mean to anchor democracy in our society. And one of those recommendations that came out in what was published as Civil Society Manifesto in March last year was exactly the call for electoral reform. So we welcome the change, the proposal, but we are happy that it has given 24 months, because during that time there has to be a really well-organized thinking process and consultative process for what that might mean. There are a number of things that go into this. One of them is the fact that we don't have a really accountable legislature to society. This might mean that maybe we would want to have something like 75% of members of the legislature elected by constituency, maybe keeping some 25% to allow for a kind of party list system, so that you can have a broader participation in parliament, even for smaller parties. These are the kinds of things that we need to be talking about. And it also means we need to take a look at what is the best way for electing a president in a way that ensures stability in society, but also make sure that there's as much opportunity as possible for those who would be eligible for this office. It might also mean that there might be a need to take another look at what does it mean to have a stronger district government as opposed to having a strong provincial government, which is further away from the municipalities. All these are the things that we believe need a conversation in the coming months. But it's not going to make much of a difference if it does not also go with a review of the civil service, so that we have a much more professional civil service rather than a politicized civil service. So all these are some of the things that we believe will need attention over the next 24 months, and we trust that this process will take its course indeed.
Let's thank you again for your time.
Thank you, ma'am.